Welcome to another edition of Cults and the Culting of America podcast. My name is Scot Loyd, along with knitting cult lady Daniella Mestyanek Young. Daniella, you're coming off recording the new book. That makes for a busy week.
It was really hard, really hard. Yeah. I'm proud of it though. It was really hard, but I'm proud of it
Absolutely.
and super excited to share. Also, it's such a great timing to have this guest on today because this
Yes.
guest I learned about as I recently saw a review of their book that compared it to my book. And I think it's a really cool point in an author's life. Like, we all go through the process of comparing our books to the books that are out there. And, like, you know what that's like, Scott, and I know what that's like. And it's just cool from the author side to see that, like, someone else or like another reviewer is comparing an up and coming book to your book. So I'm really excited to talk to our guest today.
Yeah, Beth Granger is joining us, and Beth, welcome to our podcast, and we're really thrilled to have you. So why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you. It's so great to be here. And I'm really thrilled to talk to you guys. Well, number one, I'm a cult survivor. Actually, I'm a cult baby, just like Daniella. Although in my case, it took me 3 decades to get the courage to escape. I'm also a representative plaintiff in a landmark class action lawsuit against our abusers. Spoiler alert, our case became the first historical abuse case to win a trial in Canada. So I'm proud of that. It took us 16 years to get through the courts.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm a diet culture dropout. More on that later. I had a skinny white lady in charge of me. She was one of the cult leaders. I'm a recovering overachiever, as many of us are. And last but not least, I am a published author. My book just came out in February. It's called Born and RAZED.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. It's Born and RAZED. Surviving the cult was only half the battle. And RAZED is spelled RAZED, which I think is fitting for anyone who's born into a cult. And that's the bare bones of who I am.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your cult experience, where and when that happened, and what that looked like for you. You said you was a cult baby growing up in that particular environment.
Sure. Well, I was the first staff kid born to staff at Grenville Christian College, which was an elite private boarding school in Canada that advertised itself to be Anglican. But in truth, it was a cult hiding in plain sight. We even duped the Anglicans. What happened was when I was about 3, our school was struggling financially, and the leaders were looking for spiritual advice. So they reached out to 2 women who were leaders of a cult in Cape Cod called the Community of Jesus. Well, a commune. We didn't call it a cult. But under their influence, our school became like a satellite to their, headquarters. Our school became an institution of paranoia that brainwashed and abused and terrorized its residents for decades. So that's the sort of setting of the scene. As I mentioned, fast forward, I would become a representative plaintiff. 6 years after I left, I was 37, and the school went bankrupt. And that's when all the allegations of abuse exploded online like a volcano. And that's when I came to understand that it was a cult. Prior to that, though, the school had enjoyed a pristine reputation. It appeared to be this successful, beautiful institution with members on the advisory board from the highest levels of society and government. And none of them knew what was really going on behind the glowing facade. And the truth remained hidden until the school closed due to bankruptcy. So yeah, that's the bare bones
Yeah.
of the story.
You subtitle your book "Surviving the Cult Was Only Half of the Battle," and I think that's a really interesting subtitle. I want you to flesh that out a little bit for us, because on this show, I think ourselves and our guests, we spend a lot of time talking about life in the cult.
Mhm.
But what do you mean by that subtitle? What does that look like for you now on the other side of it?
Well, how much time have you got?
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
let's see. Well, it implied that, half the story was going to be about the cult, and it is roughly half. It's part one of my story out of two parts. And it's like I was there for 30 years, so there's a lot to the survival of it. And we can get more into what it was like to live there. But I wanted to write a book that helped people when we write our memoirs, and when we read, part of recovery is a big part of my recovery is reading other people's memoirs. And I kept looking for people to talk about what it was like to recover,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of, a good cult story can lead up to just leaving. And that can be the
Right.
great triumphant ending. But I wanted to know, how are people recovering? Because I just felt like such a mess I've been out since, I'm 55, and I've been out since I was 31. And I'm only now coming to some semblance of recovery. And I've been through so many ups and downs, like a really long, winding road. So yeah, I wanted to write how difficult it is to survive outside of a cult when you leave everything behind, everyone behind, and you enter a world where you just don't know yourself, and you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know
Yeah.
how to even comprehend what you went through. So yeah, about at least a third of my book is that journey, including, obviously, for me, a huge part of my recovery was leading this lawsuit. I didn't have any clue how hard it would be, but I knew in my mind, I knew my intuition was telling me that it would be a huge part of my recovery and my healing. And all along, I've learned to follow my intuition, and it has been a huge part of finding my way. So I don't know. I mean, we can get into more
Yeah.
specifics, but that's kind of the
Well,
deal.
I think, as someone who, of course, has read many cult memoirs, runs a book club on cult memoirs, has written my own cult memoir, it is so important, right? And it's like we need those stories that describe the absolute horrors and like really, really take you there. But what we need and what I think we lack is showing the afterward a lot of times. I really love Tia Leving's book, A Well Trained Wife, because she shows the recovery. I think Scott's book is interesting because he's showing the process of afterward. And when I
Yeah.
read your review of your book, that's like my first thought was like, oh, yes, she does something else with it. Like there's a next part. And like, obviously, that is also the way I chose to write my book. But even in my book, I'm kind of giving two parallel cult experiences, not nearly as much of the recovery. And that is something that I have heard often from the cult audience, right? Is like, there's understanding what you survived, and then there's understanding the next part. And I'm working on a musical, and the very last song is called Living with It. And this is what I want like all the actors to contribute a line to. And it's like, because from everyone I've talked to, that's part of it. It's like we are all here living with it, living with what happened, working that into our lives, seeing that new version of us, kind of,
Yeah,
I don't know, like a constant process of self-actualization because we didn't get to do that because we grew up in cults. So I
I
love
love
that you
that.
get into that.
Yeah, and I love the idea of living with. Yeah, and I like your idea of the musical. I'm a big fan of musicals, and I can't wait to see where yours goes. One of my favorite musicals in the world is the Book of Mormon. I scream laughed at that.
And this was one of my concepts is I want to make the Book of Mormon, but for all cult babies, and I'm actually really excited because I wrote a song, Half a Day, and it's a song from the army side. It's like the bop of like the little lieutenant getting all overwhelmed and like trying to put up with the pressure. But then, so when I play it for like my army sisters, they love it. But then I played it for cult babies, like grew up child soldiers, and they were like, yeah, 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 relating. So I'm like,
Love that.
yes, this is what I'm hoping for. So I'm excited.
That's fun.
Sorry. Back to your book.
No, it's fine. I mean, I don't know if you want me to get more into the whole, like, what I've learned from recovery or what,
Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned something that resonates with me, and we've talked a lot about on this program, is that those of us that grew up in groups like this, we emerge on the other side, and a lot of us, find ourselves in our 40s and 50s, and I know my experience has been I don't know how to function in the world, right? I'm figuring things out as if I was just graduating from high school or something, and that really makes those of us that are of a certain age feel a certain way, and I think you really articulated it there with your comments. I am curious if you're willing to share some of the things that you experienced growing up, and then maybe when you first began to realize I'm not in a good place, and maybe what Daniela often describes as the crack and the brainwashing. When did that start for you, and what did that look like?
okay. Well, so I told you about how the school appeared to be this fantastic elite institution, and it really did. I mean, even now, 20 years later, after the lawsuit, we still have people in the area that can't believe the stories of the truth that are coming out because it appeared to be such a fantastic institution. But what was really going on, we had this motto, excellence to the glory of God. But the other motto that wasn't published was that we will break you down and build you up the Grenville way. And they would not only break us staff kids and the staff down, but any student that any paying boarding student would arrive on the scene and they would be broken down through a all you can eat buffet of coercive tactics. One of them was light sessions, which were when people were publicly humiliated for their sins, both real and imagined. You never knew when you'd be next. And we lived in constant fear. Right from the get go, they dismantled families. That was another thing. So when I was 4, I was removed from my parents' care. And they used to tell our parents all the time that they were too idolatrous. That was their sin that had to be eradicated, and that they were blind to their children's sin. So we couldn't live with them. But what I learned from such a young age was that it was a sin to love me, which you don't get over. They had a spy network from the top down. Everyone from the leaders to the staff kids and prefects were expected to turn people in for any number of breaking any number of rules that were both written and unwritten. They also required written confessions, which were always used against us. And then there was the constant threat of discipline, which was harsh and unpredictable. It was anything from strenuous, hard labor to beatings with a big paddle to having your hair cut short so you wouldn't be a temptress. You could get paddled for not turning in a friend, or for having a bad attitude or sinning in your mind. Students would be disciplined for having contraband items in the locked luggage room, like jeans, for example, or a Walkman. So there were so many rules, and it was really, the rules were really hard to take, but the fact that there were a lot of unwritten rules was so difficult. And the disciplines just kept getting more and more arbitrary and like kind of inventive, over the years. Like when I was 5, I was put on my first diet for my sin of gluttony. And that started off a whole lifetime of eating disorders. But, another one was they were always trying to eradicate my ego. And I was a good student. So by the time I was in grade 9, I wasn't allowed to see my grades right through high school. That was really hard for me to take, but it wasn't nearly as bad as, I was expelled at age 16 and sent down to the cult headquarters indefinitely because they found proof that I had a crush on a boy. It never ended. Like another example, I could go on and on, but
Yeah.
the disciplines were really cruel. At one time, I was fired. We had to take lifetime vows of obedience. We staff kids and staff. You couldn't work there unless you took lifetime vows. And I had taken mine when I was 21. But then when I was 23, one of my confession notes was because we always had to come up with sins, right? So I confessed to having a bulimic episode, and I was called to the office of the headmaster and fired for that. And so I had to keep working for no pay indefinitely because of that. So those are just a few little examples, but you get the idea. We were living under so much pressure to be perfect, but also you could never measure up, And then, I could talk much more about how we were controlled and all of that. But basically, you asked what was the breaking point. I will say in my 20s as a staff member, life didn't get easier. And the disciplines just kept getting new and inventive. We had one year when we were put on boot camp, all of us young single women, for a whole year. Um, at the age of 25, we had crazy disciplines, like we couldn't take showers and baths. We had to use sponge baths, and we couldn't wear makeup or have our hair done. Like it was just majorly humiliating. That was just part of it. But as I got older, I started realizing that I might never be happy there. And that felt like a really rebellious, scary thought because I was trained and taught that my happiness didn't mean anything. In fact, it was the lowest priority. You know, we were there to give our lives to God. We didn't need to be happy, but I started realizing I don't know if I can do this. Also, one of the things that happened was that I'd lost hope of getting married there. We weren't allowed to marry outsiders, and there were only about 100 staff. Well, that's actually a lot of staff, but that's how many were in our community. And there were no men left after the one man that I got engaged to broke off our engagement after while we were planning the wedding, and he didn't give me any reason, and I just like I broke basically. I couldn't handle that I went into a deep depression, and it was like I'd finally gotten this tiny taste of being loved, and then it got ripped away from me, and I didn't think I could stay or handle it. And the thing that allowed me to start critically thinking was a knee surgery of all things. I actually needed knee surgery, and I was given special permission to leave campus and go get physiotherapy. And my physiotherapist and my doctor urged me to join aquafit classes at the YMCA, and I started intermingling with people in the nearby town and started making friends and started getting fit and strong and recovered from the surgery. And I started feeling like a caged animal. And also, I started questioning everything. And it took me 3 years. I was by then 27, and it took me 3 years to get the courage to leave, not thinking that there was anything wrong with the place. I thought I
Oh.
was the rebel, and I thought I
Mhm.
was the failure. I finally decided if I'm going to hell, then so be it. I already am so unhappy here. I just have to leave. And yeah, it took me a long time to get my ducks in a row, figure out how to leave, what I was gonna do with my life. Um, and I was very strategic about it. But yeah, I didn't understand that it was a cult or it was a problem, a harmful place until 6 years after I'd left.
And
The place
I
closed.
I just want to say, like, part of why I wrote my book was because everyone basically on earth has agreed that, like, yes, Children of God was a bad cult, right? But like, Beth, everything you said, like, we could just have been talking to another Children of God survivor. Like,
Yeah.
exactly all of it. And some of it was also the more inhumane parts of military training on top of that. And just like the way I think that Americans and Canadians have been gaslit about these experiences. And, what you said about making friends on the outside was very important to me. Like, I just wrote in Culting of America, which is my next book coming out, about like one of the reasons that cults keep you so afraid of the outside is because they don't want you to believe you have a choice. And then you will make a friend. This is another reason they don't like medical care, and interacting with the outside world, because you realize like these people are not mean or controlling or evil, and like having those opportunities for that interaction can be so mind opening, and that's why they focus so hard on like making us fear the outside world, especially as children coming up into it.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like all it took was, yeah, the opportunity to meet a few people. And yeah, it was just and so the people that I befriended happened to be non-believers, but I could see that they were really good people and they just really loving and honest and good. I could tell that I'd be happier with them even though they didn't go to church, and that confused me. But I couldn't.
I remember growing up in the United Pentecostal Church, I had similar experiences where I would interact with people, friends from my school. And, they obviously had different beliefs about Christian theology, things of that nature. And we would sort of talk about it. And I think initially for me, those were the beginnings of the cracks in my brainwashing as well, where you interact with that are different than you, and you have the opportunity to catch a glimpse of the world that is different than your own experience. So I think that's very helpful. I know that a lot of us growing up in these experiences, on the other side of it, we experience a grief of sorts, not only um, for the people that, we have those mixed feelings about, right? Some of them were good, some of them were bad, some of them were problematic, but we also sort of grieve the version of ourselves maybe that we lost. Or I know in my experience, a lot of it had to do with the youth that I had, that I experienced, that I gave a lot of time, energy, and free labor to the cult that I was a part of. So what does the grieving process look like for you? For me, it's still ongoing in a lot of ways. I'm learning how to manage that. You want to talk a little bit about maybe any grief that you've experienced?
Yeah, I really, that's so important. One thing was, when I left, I felt so lonely, and I missed being part of a group of like-minded believers. And we had been, like I mentioned before, we had been this, dynamic, effective team of Christian education, and we performed and we pulled out all the stops. Everything was a showstopper, and it felt like the rest of the world was just coasting. And
Yeah,
I was like, what's
exactly.
wrong with you guys? Let's get, like, even as I became a public school teacher, and I used to, like I said, I was an overachiever, and I used to look at all the other teachers thinking, you guys are, so half-assed. Like,
Yes,
so I just
yes.
I missed being part of that group. I still miss it, and yet I knew enough. I didn't even know it was a cult, but I just knew enough that there was an element to it that it was toxic, and I couldn't put up with it. But I still miss that, and for a while I would go to church. I was shopping for churches for years, and then I had little children, and I would drag them to church, thinking they'd be going to hell if I didn't. But it became very clear to me that that was not a good move for my healing, because I couldn't stop crying in church, and I didn't know why. Like, I didn't realize this was before the school had closed, and I was like, "What? Where are these tears coming from?" I thought maybe it was because I belonged back there, but it didn't take long. Actually, it was my son's hockey schedule that saved me from church, because I couldn't do both. And I realized eventually that it was actually, I was crying because I was triggered, because God had been used like, Christianity had
Yeah.
been weaponized in a brutal way with us. And the grief that I feel now is that I don't, I guess I grieve that certainty. People ask me all the time in book events, what's your faith? That's one of their big questions. I'm like, I want to say it's none of your business, but I do say, I do go into it, and I'm honest. I have to say that I don't know. I'm basically, learning to bask in the sea of doubt, and I'm in that place where I don't know. And I think that's more honest for me than
Yeah.
anything else I could
And
say.
also think this is one of the griefs of cult babies, right? Specifically. And I tried to write to this also in the book, like the grief of leaving, the grief of like that buzzing excitement of being part of a team that was supposedly changing the world. And that was all we knew growing up. And it, you know, like I am not religious and it doesn't really bother me because like that conversation you had with yourself about hell, I had that when I was 6. Like same exact conversation. Like I haven't really been a spiritual person. My child is different, by the way. So that's interesting for me. But one of the answers I give people is that I think one of the abuses of, these like religious cults is you lose the like opportunity. Like once you believed that hard in something and then found out that like that was wrong. I always say, like, short of being knocked off my horse on the road to Damascus, like, what religion would I choose? Like I feel that one of the things that was taken from me before I was even ever old enough to miss it was the ability to be religious or belong in a community like that because of the
Absolutely.
extreme version that I was given.
Yeah. I totally feel the same way.
And
And it triggers me when people like having written the book, I end the book basically being honest about my skepticism and my disillusionment with the way religion is so harmful in many ways these days. And I've had some people who have who urged me to change the book. They were like, "Don't publish it like that. You'll never heal unless you go back to God." And and I've had to just exit their lives because like that's not my path. I can't, so at least I don't see it happening. But
You know,
I
and I
and I yeah.
And I've noticed a pattern, right? And I went through this somewhat myself when I left the cult of my youth, right? I would exchange one dogmatic certainty for another. And so I sort of went through these phases where I was a theology nerd, right? So I was investigating and looking into every stream of Christianity imaginable. And I would do a deep dive, and it was like for a season of months or sometimes years, I would camp out in a particular belief system. And so I think all of us go through that. Daniella went through it when she, what'd you say, 6? You are an overachiever. And the rest of us kind of go through it later on in life, but we all experience it, especially when you're leaving those particular groups. And I think your answer is absolutely beautiful. And I think it's just fine that, there is a tension for those of us like myself who have chosen to hang on to vestiges of a belief system. In my case, it's Christianity. But it's a far less dogmatic certainty. And if people ask me, typically my question is much like yours. I don't know anything for certain.
Yeah. The more I know, the more I realize I don't know anything.
I've been thinking about this a lot because I walked away from religion when I was 15, right? When I was 15, I walked out of religion and I literally remember at the time being like, I can't think about it. I just got to survive. When I'm 19 and I have all my life figured out, I'll go away to the mountains and I'll think about religion. By the time I was 19, I was a huge atheist, right? And so I honestly didn't realize until I wrote a book and got reconnected to the evangelical community that not only did I need to still deconstruct religion, but like we are all cultural Christians, right? Like we are cultural evangelicals. And like
Yes.
that's what made us. And I recently started deconstructing Swiftianity, which is a whole parallel conversation. And they immediately came for me with, well, you were never a real Christian and you grew up in the jungle, but okay. But like, that was a little upsetting to me because I was like, no, like, you don't get to say, like, your Christianity is too much. You don't count as one of these. Like, and I actually think that regardless of whether we like choose to hang on to the vestiges or not, it's like here's how I'm going to explain it. When my musician friend was helping me put the chords to Have a Day and she started strumming, and I was like, oh my God, it sounds like my dad's Bible music. It's perfect. Like, that's what I needed, And like
Yeah.
that culture is never not going to be there. I've come back to this. Like, no matter how much I deconstruct music, I was listening to American country music in my teenage years. And so I'm always going to come back to that and like kind of have to struggle with it in a different way. And I just like to emphasize this so much for our listeners. And you're such a good example of this, of like, it's the work. It's living with it. Like we never get to go back and not be cult babies. So we're always going to be developing in reverse, sort of presenting as full grown adults when we don't have this like filling in the middle. And it's just really hard to describe. I appreciate this conversation with you.
Yeah, well, you reminded me when you said about your dad's chorus. Like, my father was the music director at our school, and our school was well known for its music program. And when I left, I didn't do any music for 15 years, and I'm a good singer and also play viola. So when I was 45, I finally decided, with my help of my therapist, that I needed to bring back music. And immediately I decided I wanted to sing with a concert choir. And much of what they sing is sacred music, like the Mozarts and the Bachs and the Beethovens and whatever. And I just cried and cried starting to sing it again because it was so beautiful. And we were able to sing without any mind games and, cult tactics. And
Right.
that's something that I can handle and I want in my life, but other things I can't handle, So I think it's very individual for people, because I know some people can't even stand to listen to the Messiah again, whereas I love it. It's beautiful. So yeah, there are elements, and I do, and I'm constantly, like you said, living with it and trying to keep an open mind, because I'm very well aware that the Jesus of the Bible is teaches us things that I value. But the Jesus that you see in politics right now, with a certain, right wing, is the opposite. And that triggers the hell out of me, what's going on in politics. So yeah, it's all very upsetting for us cult babies.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you mentioned music, because that's, I listened to so much Christian music in my youth that now even those that are sort of trying to disguise that they're Christian music, I can pick it out in a minute. It's like, I know who you are. I know what you're doing. That was my first job, right? I was that guy who showed up at the skating rink and was exclusively given the responsibility for Christian music skate night. So I know the music.
You were asking me about grief too. I wanted to mention one other thing is they dismantled our families, as I mentioned, and that is something I live with on a daily basis, the grief of my dismantled family, because we were basically destroyed. I had 3 brothers. I have 3 brothers, but they're not in my life. One is a monk at the Community of Jesus. They have a whole sisterhood and brotherhood. He's been there since he was 21 as a vowed member, a vowed monk. And I don't have communication with him ever since I joined the lawsuit, because that lawsuit indirectly implicated them. And then my youngest brother, he he's like the worst case scenario, aside from possibly, he's the worst case scenario of what can happen with a cult baby. He's been on the streets, homeless, or in jail, extremely mentally ill for the last 20 years. And then I have another brother who's more functioning for sure, but we've had a falling out recently with like politics, and so it's just, yeah, the grief of the shattered families is just, it's a lot. And yeah, I just got a letter from my brother in jail just yesterday, and every time I read it, I cry. Yeah. Anyway.
I but I think it is such an important thing to talk about, especially because cults demonize emotions, and especially all the emotions considered to be negative. And like, it took me a long time to realize that like my anger wasn't me having a problem, especially because I was being told by friends and family that my anger was me having a problem. And like, no, like I was legitimately angry. And one of like, to me, it came to me first as anger and then as grief, was like, I didn't get to be raised by my mom, by my parent. And my parent is actually awesome. And, you know, I've gotten to watch them raise their youngest and like have really actually enjoyed, and, you know, like, more credit to my mom, who was also a cult baby, that she really dedicated herself to raising the one child she got to raise. And then she turned around and like adult parented her children in reverse. And she's done a phenomenal job, but I just like, as I am raising my child, and she's a huge part of my life, you know, and I just sometimes feel so much anger that that was taken from us. And like, and I wanna say, like, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. So now my mom and I have this thing that we talk about, that because we only have a 15-year age difference. So in our fantasy, she's gonna be 90 and I'm gonna be 75, and we're gonna be in the retirement home, like spinning the yarns and spinning the yarns. And we know we're probably never gonna get there, but like, it's led us to having deeper conversations, and it's led me to be able to actually talk about how sad I am about that, and do things like, when I do see her once or twice a year, I try to just sit there and let her hug me, cuz I know she probably really wants to do that. Um, you know, because we've talked about that grief. And it's just, there's so much smashing down of the quote unquote negative emotions. And I think it's so important that you are emphasizing the grief in the process, and the like shattered stuff that doesn't get put back together.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy for you. That's fantastic. I think in our case, well, because I was there for so long, and my parents bought into it, so they were such loyal, dedicated, you know, well, not that your mom wasn't, but I'm just saying, like, they got completely broken in terms of their ability to parent, and were just unable to show love. And so now I feel that this distance. I can't. I care about my parents. I've done, I do what we've actually housed them since the school closed, me and my husband. I feel an obligation as a child, as their child, the only one who can help them. But it's like there's been a rift, and you can't manufacture it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. We're healing, but it's been really, really tough.
Yeah, and it's like, this is such a key struggle with cults, is that they destroy families. And then we get out and we're technically a family. And so I think we're kind of like cosplaying family, but we don't
Yes.
have the basis. You know, like, that's, I say, with like, me and my mom have a good relationship, but we've spent decades having conversations, and like, we're still figuring stuff out. Whereas I'm like, I'm not going to have to do that with my child, because I'm going to have a 30-year history of having this established with her. And I really truly don't think we talk enough about the impact on families in the after effect. And, this is something we're seeing at scale in America right now, because there's so many sort of situations of this happening, of like millennials specifically trying to come to terms with the uber religious upbringing and like what their parents sacrificed, and just like nobody being willing to have the conversation, because that
Yeah.
resiliency to have hard conversations and disagree, like, wasn't built in.
Yeah. And I know I normalize everything that happened to me, as we all do. And so it helps when my therapist, so I look at my parents and I think, oh, there's nothing wrong with what they did. But then my therapist will say, would you do the same with your child? And having children of my own has made me see it completely differently. And that is something that snaps me back into focus. So yeah, it's just an ongoing grief, as you know. Anyway.
Beth, you mentioned that you were part of the largest class action lawsuit in Canadian history, and why do you feel like that serves as an example of why community resilience can stand against coercive organizations? Obviously, this was something that you're involved in and involves a lot of people. I imagine that it took some time for this to come together and people talking to one another and sharing their experiences.
Hmm. I don't know if it was the largest class action, but it was the first historical abuse case to
Okay.
win at trial in Canada. So we were breaking ground for sure, and heading into uncharted waters when we got to the trial. To backtrack, as I said, when the school closed in 2007, um, uh, there was an online website where people could go who are cult survivors, and they could talk about their abuse anonymously. And people gathered there, and like thousands of posts were just appeared within months of the school closing. And that's when I and a lot of us just got sucked into that rabbit hole. And that's when my understanding just sort of dawned. And I did some research and learned what cults were. I had previously completely disregarded when anyone said that Grenville had been a cult. I disregarded them. I thought they were exaggerating. But when I started reading books about cults, and if your book had been out, Daniella, I would have found that very helpful. You know, Stephen Hassan's book, we checked all the boxes, and I realized what we were dealing with. And I quickly joined a small group of survivors who were looking towards getting legal representation, only because the school, right off the bat, chose not to take responsibility for the allegations against them. If they had come out, and by the way, things didn't just go online. People went to the newspaper. It got splashed across the media headlines across Canada, for at least. And so the last headmaster at the school was on record saying that there was no truth to the allegations. And I knew he was lying. And that was enough for me to just realize, well, the truth needs to come out, because I, by then, understood that hundreds of students had been damaged there. At that point, I didn't see that I had been damaged. It took me a long time to see the truth. But, you start somewhere, right? And when I joined, as I said before, I only had this inkling that it was my path to healing. And if I had known how hard it would be, I never would have, I wouldn't have done it. It was, brutal, especially like we went through many depositions across the years, and those just sidelined me. But then the trial was 5 weeks. I was on the stand for 3 days. I was triggered like I cannot even describe, because it was like being in a light session for 3 days, and they tried to break me, as defense lawyers do. And I don't know if I'm even answering your question now.
No, I
I was just
appreciate you
thinking to
sort of talking about
myself,
how that came together and talking to one another. Yeah.
I was just thinking to myself, good thing you already had a lot of experience with people trying to break you. I feel like maybe defense lawyers didn't know what they signed up for with you.
Yeah, well, I tell you, like, I kept telling myself it's safer in the courtroom than it was in the cult. Like, I just had to keep reminding myself of that. And also, I reminded myself that they're professionals, they're just doing their job. But it was brutal for me. I write it in detail, that there's a chapter on the trial itself. I guess I can't remember the full question that you had. I don't know if I answered it.
No, it's fine. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that and perhaps how you reconnected with other survivors and how that came about.
Yeah, the other thing I did that spurred me on all through those years, which were very difficult, because one of the things I learned, and that have, I hope people will learn from my book is that if you try to outrun your trauma, which most of us do, especially if you're inclined to be a super achiever and perfectionist, you think, oh, I'm out of the cult. Now I can prove myself and everything's going to be fine. You can't outrun your trauma. I thought I was dealing with it as the lawsuit was unfolding, but I couldn't really. Like, I was working full time as a teacher, I was a mom, I was running this lawsuit, and I wasn't running it, but helping spearhead it. And it was very difficult. But one thing that really motivated me was I constantly heard people's stories because as a representative plaintiff, they would share them with me or I was privy to them. And I I constantly said to myself, when am I going to stop being shocked by people's stories? Because, like, it's like every single person who would share I would feel just terrible about what I knew that they had endured. And so that just motivated me to keep going. And then once the trial happened and we won, and then we won an appeal, and I started to want to write my book because I haven't talked about this, but my trauma did catch up with me at the same time that the trial happened in 2019, and I lost my career because I had been on benzodiazepines for over 10 years, and I don't know if people know what those are, but like Ativan is what I was on. Um, they are not recommended to be on long term, and I had been with a psychiatrist who had tried all kinds of other things, but by the time Ativan was the only thing that seemed to work for me. And I started losing my ability to remember even my students' names. And I'm, I think I'm wandering here, but basically, what I'm trying to say is my um, my trauma caught up with me in 2019. I was not able to work through the withdrawal of those meds, and yeah, this is where my brain sometimes does these things. Where was I? I was okay. So, oh I was talking about how I everything fell apart, and to actually heal, to actually face the trauma and to really process it, it took writing the book. And writing the book, I was motivated to do because I was so well aware that it wasn't just my story. And I
Right.
wanted to write the story of those people who I'd represented in the lawsuit. And so, yeah, I think that's
So talk a little bit about your book and where people can find it, and also, what is it that you want folks when they read it? What do you want them to take away from your book and your experience?
well, okay. So I just start with that, if you're wondering where to find it, just look up Born and Raised. You'll get it. But I do have a website. It's bethgranger.ca. And from there, you can find me on all the socials and you can see about the book. As far as what I want people to take away from the book, well, I just want readers to remember that people are breakable. And when leaders intentionally break people with weaponized religion or coercive control, sometimes the damage is permanent. And it's not a small issue. And then I hope my story acts as a catalyst for healing, and it already is. And I'm really excited to hear from so many readers. But I also hope it's a cautionary tale, inspiring people to preserve the separation of church and state, for one thing, and I hope people start asking, questioning aspects of our society that are problematic, in my opinion. Like, why are churches tax exempt when they're amassing huge political influence? Why are institutions like private religious schools and troubled teen programs so often unregulated? And the fact that religious leaders are more legally protected than their vulnerable followers is also an issue that really gets my goat. So I just hope people start asking the questions. I don't have the answers, but people join me in asking the questions. I just hope they do, because when religion and power collide in the wrong hands, the result can be countless broken lives.
Well said. Beth Granger is the author of Born and Raised, and thank you so much for, first of all, just kudos in sharing your story, the courage that it takes to do that. Your vulnerability is inspiring and helpful to all of us who have had similar experiences. And it's my hope that somebody who maybe is thinking of escaping or leaving the group that they feel like defines their reality will find your book or maybe listen to this podcast and find some hope. So Beth, thank you for sharing that with our audience.
Thank you. It's really been a honor to be here. And thanks for the work you're doing. It really matters.
I appreciate it. It looks like we lost Daniella along the way. I think maybe she was having some internet connection problems, but she was here and we'll catch her on the flip side. Beth, thanks again. We look forward to maybe having you back on in the future to talk more about what you're doing these days and how that can be helpful.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And I
You're
got to read your
welcome.
book too.
Well, yes, absolutely. I would
Congrats.
appreciate it. Yeah, the name of my book is The God That I Was Given, Looking for Faith After Losing My Religion. And it's available on Amazon. So I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to plug that once again. Thank you.
It sounds like an important book. So thank you. I got to check it out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. For Daniella Mestyanek Young, Knitting Cult Lady, I'm Scot Loyd. We'll see you on the next episode of Cults and the Culting of America podcast.